I am Dustin, 32 years old, a software developer from Boston with an identical twin brother, Derek. Growing up, my parents always favored him over me in ways both subtle and obvious. But nothing compared to when they liquidated their retirement to give him $400,000 for his revolutionary business idea while telling me to figure it out myself. What they never expected was that his business would spectacularly implode, taking their financial security with it. Before I dive into how my family's favoritism backfired spectacularly, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button so you do not miss the moment justice was finally served. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Brookline just outside Boston proper, Derek and I shared everything from our DNA to our bedroom. To strangers, we were indistinguishable, but to our parents, Richard and Patricia, we might as well have been from different planets. The favoritism started in subtle ways. On our 6th birthday, I received a standard Lego set, while Derek got the deluxe version with 3 times as many pieces. When I asked why, Mom simply said, "Your brother showed more interest in building things." But how could she know that when neither of us had owned Legos before? As we entered elementary school, the preferential treatment became more obvious. Derek showed interest in baseball, so Dad immediately signed him up for the local Little League team. When he displayed even marginal talent, they hired a private coach who charged $70 per hour. Meanwhile, when I joined the school science club, my parents told me the $20 annual fee was quite expensive and I should make sure I was serious about it. Our parents never missed a single one of Derek's games. They would reschedule important meetings, cancel dinner plans, and drive for hours in terrible traffic just to see him play. But my science competitions, they made it to maybe 1 in 4, always with some excuse about prior commitments or work emergencies. I still remember winning first place at the regional science fair in 8th grade and looking out at the audience, seeing the empty seats where my parents promised they would be. Later I learned they had skipped it to attend Derek's baseball practice. Not even a game, just practice. Dad was a successful investment banker who saw Derek as his mini-me. They shared the same outgoing personality, the same love for sports, and the same easy charm that made people instantly like them. Mom, a former beauty queen who still prioritized appearances above all else, adored Derek's confidence and social grace. He was loud, charismatic, and demanded attention in any room he entered. I was different, quieter, more analytical, more interested in understanding how things worked than in being the center of attention. While Derek was scoring home runs and being elected class president, I was taking apart computers and putting them back together, coding simple programs and reading everything I could get my hands on about technology. "Why can you not be more like your brother?" became a common refrain in our household. When I brought home straight, as my parents would nod absently. When Derek brought home C's and B's, they would celebrate his balanced approach to school and praise him for not being obsessed with grades like some people. The summer before high school, Derek mentioned wanting a new bike. 2 days later, he had a top-of-the-line mountain bike sitting in our garage. That same summer, when my computer monitor broke, I had to mow lawns for 3 weeks to earn enough to replace it myself. When I asked Dad why he would not just buy me a new one, he looked at me seriously and said, "Dustin, you need to learn the value of working for what you want. Nothing in life comes free." Apparently, that lesson was only applicable to one twin. By the time we reached high school, I had fully internalized my place in the family hierarchy. I stopped asking for help with school projects or rides to friends' houses. I stopped expecting my parents to show up to events that mattered to me. Instead, I developed self-reliance and determination. I taught myself advanced programming languages, built my own computers from spare parts, and started taking community college classes in computer science during summer breaks. Meanwhile, Derek continued to bask in the glow of parental adoration. When he made the varsity baseball team as a sophomore, our parents threw a party and invited the entire extended family. When I was selected for a competitive programming internship that same year, they forgot to mention it during our weekly family dinner. "Computers are just a hobby, Dustin," my father said, whenever I tried to share my accomplishments. "Your brother is developing real-life skills through teamwork and leadership." The irony was that I was developing skills that would eventually support me for life, while Derek was peaking in high school, something none of us could see at the time. Our parents had created a family dynamic where one child could do no wrong and the other could never quite measure up, regardless of actual achievement. Despite the constant favoritism, I never hated Derek. How could I? He was my twin, my other half in many ways. But as we went through adolescence, I watched him absorb and begin to expect the preferential treatment. He started to believe he was special, destined for greatness, simply because our parents had told him so his entire life. He did not see how this belief was setting him up for a harsh collision with reality once he left the protective bubble our parents had created around him. By the end of high school, I had stopped looking to my parents for validation. I had friends who appreciated my technical skills, teachers who recognized my potential, and my own inner confidence that I was on the right path. Little did I know that the pattern established in our childhood would continue to play out in increasingly dramatic ways as we entered adulthood, eventually leading to a reckoning none of us could have anticipated. When college acceptance letters arrived during our senior year of high school, our diverging paths became even more pronounced. Derek got accepted to Bentley University, a prestigious private business school with a hefty price tag of nearly $50,000 per year. I received an acceptance letter from the University of Massachusetts Amherst with a partial scholarship for their computer science program. The night Derek got his acceptance letter, our parents took the entire family out to the most expensive restaurant in Boston. Dad ordered champagne for the table, with discreet glasses of sparkling cider for us since we were underage, and made a toast to the future business tycoon of the family. My acceptance letter, which had arrived 3 days earlier, warranted only a quick good job from Mom as she passed the salt during dinner. When it came time to discuss financing our education, the disparity continued. "Of course we will pay for Bentley," Dad said to Derek. "This is an investment in your future." When I asked about my tuition at UMass, which was considerably less expensive, even after accounting for my scholarship, Dad cleared his throat and said, "We think it would be good for you to have some skin in the game, Dustin. We can help with part of it, but student loans will teach you financial responsibility." That fall, Derek moved into a brand new dorm at Bentley, with a meal plan that covered everything. I moved into a cramped, outdated dorm at UMass, and immediately found a job at the campus IT department to cover expenses. While Derek joined a fraternity and built his social network, I juggled classes and a 30-hour workweek. Derek would call me occasionally, usually late on weekend nights, clearly intoxicated, rambling about the amazing connections he was making and the epic parties he was attending. "College is awesome, bro," he would slur into the phone while I sat in my dorm room, exhausted from working all day and studying all evening. Despite my heavy workload, I excelled academically. I made the dean's list every semester and developed relationships with professors who recognized my aptitude for software development. By sophomore year, I was working as a teaching assistant for introductory programming courses, which helped ease my financial burden slightly. Meanwhile, Derek was scraping by with C's and the occasional B when professors graded on a curve. He switched his concentration 3 times, eventually settling on marketing because, as he put it, the classes are easy, and it is all about who you know anyway. Our parents remained blissfully oblivious to the reality of Derek's academic performance. When he called home complaining about hard-ass professors who do not understand how business really works, they sympathized and praised his real-world perspective. When I shared news about making the dean's list again, Dad would say, "That is nice. But make sure you are developing people skills too. Those are what really matter in the long run." During junior year, I secured a highly competitive summer internship at a growing tech company in Cambridge. The position paid well and offered invaluable experience working on actual products. When I called home to share the news, Mom answered and said, "That is nice, honey. Did you hear Derek is social chair of his fraternity now? He organized a charity golf tournament and networked with several executives from major companies." The summer after junior year further highlighted our different trajectories. While I worked 50-hour weeks coding alongside professional software engineers, Derek landed a sales internship at a friend's father's company where he spent most of his time making coffee runs and occasionally sitting in on meetings. Yet somehow in my parents' retelling his experience was transformative and impressive, while mine was just typing on a computer all day. By senior year, the tech company where I had interned offered me a full-time position upon graduation with a starting salary that made my eyes widen. I accepted immediately, proud that my hard work had paid off and relieved to know I would be financially independent. Derek's post-graduation prospects were less certain. Despite his amazing network, concrete job offers were not materializing. "I am exploring my options," he would say when relatives asked about his plans at family gatherings. "I do not want to rush into anything that is not absolutely perfect for my skill set." When graduation finally arrived, our different college experiences culminated in one final insult. My graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning. Despite having months of notice, my parents called 2 weeks before to tell me they could not make it due to a prior commitment. I later learned through a Facebook post that the commitment was a golf tournament Dad had been invited to by one of his clients. Derek's graduation was the following weekend. Not only did our parents attend, but they also flew in grandparents from Arizona and threw an extravagant party at an upscale Boston hotel. There were custom decorations featuring Derek's face, a professional photographer, and a cake that read, "Congratulations to our superstar." I attended the party forcing a smile as relatives asked why I had just gotten a computer job instead of pursuing something more ambitious. One uncle, after several drinks, put his arm around me and said, "Do not worry, not everyone can be the successful twin. Families need their steady, reliable members too." I moved into a small but decent apartment in Cambridge and started my job at the tech company. Derek moved back home temporarily while he continued his job search. My parents converted the basement into a bachelor pad for him, complete with a new television and furniture. As I established myself professionally, and Derek floundered, I could not help but wonder if our parents were beginning to see the results of their long-standing favoritism. But as I would soon learn, their belief in Derek's inherent superiority was far too entrenched to be shaken by something as trivial as actual results. 3 years after college graduation, I had established myself as a valuable member of the engineering team at my tech company. I had received 2 promotions and was leading development on a promising new feature. My salary had increased significantly, and I was finally able to build a decent savings account after paying off my student loans. Derek, meanwhile, had bounced between 4 different sales jobs. Each followed a similar pattern: initial excitement about the amazing opportunity, followed by complaints about management, not recognizing his talent, culminating in either getting fired for missing targets or quitting because the company lacked vision. Between jobs, he would live at home rent-free, while our parents reassured him that he was simply too talented for conventional employment. It was during one of these unemployment periods that Derek had his epiphany. He called and insisted I meet the family for dinner that Sunday, saying he had big news to share. I arrived at my parents' house to find them practically buzzing with excitement. Derek waited until dinner was served before making his announcement. "I have figured it out," he declared, standing up with his wine glass. "My true calling. I am going to revolutionize the pet industry with a premium subscription box service for pet accessories." He called it Paw Perfect and described it as the Birchbox of the pet world, but more exclusive. Each month, subscribers would receive a curated box of luxury pet items, handcrafted leather leashes, organic treats, artisanal toys, and limited edition accessories. The pet market is worth billions. Derek continued pacing around the dining room. People treat their pets like children now. They will pay anything to feel like they are giving their fur babies the very best. Our parents watched him with undisguised adoration. Mom kept nodding enthusiastically, while Dad repeatedly murmured, "Brilliant concept. Absolutely brilliant." When Derek finished his presentation, he looked at me expectantly. "So what do you think, bro?" As someone who worked in product development, I saw numerous red flags immediately. The subscription box market was already saturated. Customer acquisition costs would be enormous. The margins on physical products would be thin. And Derek had zero experience in e-commerce inventory management or the pet industry. "It sounds interesting," I said carefully. "But have you done market research on the competition? There are already several pet subscription services out there. What is your unique value proposition?" Derek's face darkened. "Always the negative one are not you. This is premium Dustin. Luxury. Those other boxes are basic mass market garbage." "And what about startup costs?" I continued. "Inventory website, development marketing, fulfillment customer service, it all adds up quickly." "That is why I am seeking investors," Derek said proudly. I need about 400,000 to do this right. Launch with a splash, you know. Dad cleared his throat. Actually, your mother and I have discussed this already. We believe in your vision, Derek. We want to be your first investors. I nearly choked on my water. $400,000. That is a huge investment. When you recognize a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, you go all in. Dad replied, not looking at me. Derek has the vision and charisma to make this work. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. The conversation moved on to Derek's plans for a downtown office space and the rockstar team he planned to assemble. I remained quiet, my mind racing. Where were my parents planning to get that kind of money? 2 weeks later, I got my answer when Mom called me in tears. She quickly composed herself and tried to sound casual, but eventually admitted that Dad had liquidated a significant portion of their retirement accounts to fund Derek's business. They had given him $400,000. Is that financially prudent? I asked carefully. That must be a large percentage of your retirement savings. Your father knows what he is doing, Mom said defensively. This business will pay off many times over. Derek has always been destined for great things. But what if it does not work out? I pressed. That is your retirement security. Why are you always so negative about your brother? Mom snapped. Why can you not just be supportive for once? The conversation deteriorated from there, but the real gut punch came a few days later when I visited my parents in person to express my concerns more clearly. Look, I said, I am worried about you guys putting so much of your retirement into a high-risk venture. I work in the startup world. I see how often even good ideas fail. Dad fixed me with a cold stare I will never forget. Derek has vision. You are just good with computers. Figure your own life out and let us handle ours. The words hit me like a physical blow. 26 years of favoritism distilled into one crystal-clear statement. My brother was the special one, the one worth investing in. I was just good with computers and needed to figure out my own life, despite having already done exactly that. I left my parents' house that day with a strange mixture of emotions, hurt anger, indignation, but also something unexpected, a sense of final clarity. For years I had held on to some childish hope that eventually my parents would see me, really see me, and my accomplishments. In that moment I realized they never would, and strangely accepting that fact was freeing. I decided then and there to channel my hurt into something productive. If I needed to figure out my life, I would do exactly that, and I would do it so successfully that even they could not ignore it. I drove home that night with a newfound determination that would ultimately change everything. Following the figure-it-out conversation with my parents, I made a deliberate decision to channel my hurt and frustration into professional growth. The tech company I worked for was doing well, but I knew I was capable of more. I requested additional responsibilities and volunteered for challenging projects that others avoided. My manager noticed my increased dedication and put me on the fast track for advancement. Within 6 months, I received another promotion with a substantial salary increase. Instead of upgrading my lifestyle, I maintained my modest apartment and started saving aggressively. By living well below my means, I was able to put aside 30% of each paycheck. I had a goal forming in my mind: financial independence. I never wanted to be in a position where I needed to ask my parents for anything. During this time, I also began working on a side project. Through my work with various small business clients, I had identified a gap in the market for specialized inventory management software tailored to small craft breweries which were booming across New England. Nights and weekends I coded furiously, building a solution that addressed specific pain points these businesses faced, with their unique production and distribution challenges. Meanwhile, Derek's Paw Perfect was launching with considerable fanfare. He leased an expensive office in a trendy part of downtown Boston, complete with exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, and a creative lounge featuring custom pet-themed artwork. His Instagram account showcased the space extensively, always with captions about building an empire and disrupting the pet industry. Rather than starting small and scaling gradually, Derek immediately hired 6 people for his executive team, 5 of whom were fraternity brothers with no relevant experience. They all received generous salaries and titles, like Chief Vibes Officer and Director of Pet Happiness. He also spent lavishly on branding, hiring a prestigious design agency to create his logo and packaging. The actual business operations seemed secondary to creating the appearance of success. Derek's social media shifted from office photos to business trips that looked suspiciously like vacations. There he was in Miami, at a rooftop pool, claiming to be meeting with potential investors. Then in Aspen, researching premium pet winterwear suppliers, and later in Las Vegas, attending a crucial industry conference that seemed to involve mainly nightclubs and expensive restaurants. All of this was funded by my parents' $400,000, which was being burned through at an alarming rate. Not that they showed any concern. At family gatherings, they would boast about Derek's entrepreneurial genius and how he was building something revolutionary. When relatives would politely ask me about my work, Mom would quickly interject, "Dustin has a nice computer job, but let me tell you what Derek is doing." Through industry contacts, I began hearing troubling rumors about Paw Perfect. Their subscriber numbers were far below projections. The luxury products Derek had sourced were sitting in expensive warehouse space. Customer acquisition costs were through the roof, because he had insisted on printing full-page advertisements in high-end magazines, rather than focusing on targeted digital marketing. When the first boxes finally shipped nearly 3 months behind schedule, the few reviews that appeared online were mixed at best. Customers complained about the high price point, inconsistent quality, and poor customer service. Derek ignored these warning signs, blaming unsophisticated consumers who did not understand luxury. I continued to focus on my own path. My brewery management software was gaining traction. I had convinced 3 local breweries to use it for free as beta testers, and their feedback was invaluable for refining the product. Word began to spread in the tight-knit craft brewery community, and I started receiving inquiries from businesses willing to pay for the solution. 9 months after the figure-it-out conversation, I received an unexpected email from an angel investor who specialized in software for small businesses. One of my beta testers had connected us, raving about how my solution had streamlined their operations. The investor wanted to meet and discuss possibly funding further development. 2 weeks later, I had secured $150,000 in seed funding in exchange for 15% equity, a fair deal that would allow me to hire 2 developers to help expand the platform while I maintained my full-time job. I moved to a slightly better apartment but continued my frugal lifestyle, reinvesting most of the money into the business. By this point, Derek's business was showing obvious signs of trouble. The lavish office appeared increasingly empty in his social media posts. The frequency of his business trip updates had decreased significantly. When I ran into one of his fraternity brother executives at a coffee shop, the guy mentioned he was between opportunities, indicating he was no longer working for Paw Perfect. At our parents' anniversary dinner, Derek arrived late, looking stressed and disheveled, a sharp contrast to his usual polished appearance. He deflected questions about the business with vague responses about recalibrating the model and pivoting to a new target demographic. Our parents still beamed at him adoringly, but I could see worry lines forming around Dad's eyes when he thought no one was looking. That night, as I was leaving, Dad pulled me aside and asked casually about investment opportunities in tech. It was the first time he had ever expressed interest in my industry. I gave him some general information, but felt a knot forming in my stomach. Were they looking to invest more money in Derek's failing business? Or were they finally realizing they needed to diversify their remaining assets? I did not have to wonder long. A week later, Mom called to catch up, something she rarely did. After awkward small talk, she mentioned that they were helping Derek with a business transition and asked if I knew any good web developers who might work for mostly equity with a small salary. I recommended they hire professionals properly if they wanted quality work, which ended the conversation quickly. By the 1-year mark of Paw Perfect's official launch, my brewery management software was serving 20 paying clients and growing steadily, while Derek's business was clearly on life support. His once prolific social media had gone quiet for weeks at a time. The flashy office had been vacated for a virtual work environment, according to the one post addressing the change. The contrast between our situations could not have been more stark. I had started small, with a clear market need and minimal overhead, focusing on sustainable growth. Derek had started with a splash, prioritizing appearances over fundamentals, assuming success was his birthright. As the inevitable collapse approached, I found myself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions and satisfaction, that reality was finally asserting itself. Worry for my parents' financial security, and a surprising twinge of sadness for my one twin, who had never been taught the value of hard work and realistic expectations. 18 months after its grand launch, Paw Perfect imploded spectacularly. The end came not with a bang, but with a series of increasingly desperate attempts to keep the business afloat. Derek had cycled through 3 different pivots, each more ill-conceived than the last. First, he tried shifting to an ultra-premium model with even higher prices, which further alienated potential customers. Then he attempted to move into pet wellness with CBD-infused treats, only to run afoul of regulatory issues he had not researched. Finally, he tried a last-ditch subscription model for pet lifestyle content, a monthly digital magazine that nobody asked for or wanted. The money was completely gone. $400,000 had vanished with virtually nothing to show for it, except some unsold inventory, a defunct website, and a trail of angry vendors demanding payment. What made matters worse was that Derek had documented everything on social media. Every expensive business trip, every office renovation, every team-building exercise at high-end restaurants now served as a digital paper trail of mismanagement and excess. The few investors he had managed to bring in beyond my parents were asking uncomfortable questions about where exactly their money had gone. One threatened legal action, prompting a financial audit that revealed the extent of Derek's mismanagement. The line between business and personal expenses had been blurry at best. The crucial business meetings at 5-star resorts, the company car, a BMW he had always wanted, the office furnishings that somehow ended up in his apartment when the lease was terminated, all painted a damning picture of someone who had treated business funding as a personal slush fund. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Derek refused to accept responsibility. According to him, the business failed because the economy took a downturn. It had not because the employees lacked his vision, most were his unqualified friends, and because haters sabotaged the brand online. The negative reviews were from actual dissatisfied customers. Our parents initially defended him vigorously. All businesses have setbacks, Dad insisted during an uncomfortable family dinner where the topic could no longer be avoided. Even Steve Jobs had failures before Apple became successful. This was not a setback, I pointed out as gently as I could. The business is completely defunct. The money is gone. You have always been jealous of your brother's ambition, Mom snapped. At least he tried to build something instead of just working for someone else. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that they were likely dealing with the dawning realization that their retirement savings had evaporated. My own software company was now serving over 40 breweries across the Northeast and had expanded to wineries and distilleries as well. I had 5 employees and had moved into a proper office space, a modest one that we had outgrown, not a showcase designed to impress. The full impact of the financial loss hit my parents about a month later. Dad, at 63, had been planning to retire the following year. Instead, he had to face the fact that their retirement accounts were depleted. They had always assumed Derek's business would provide a substantial return on their investment, allowing them to recoup the $400,000 and then some. Now that money was gone, along with their dreams of a comfortable retirement. The panic set in gradually then, all at once. Mom called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Your father and I were wondering if you might be able to help us out with a temporary loan, just until we figure things out. A loan, I repeated, genuinely surprised. How much are we talking about? The figure she mentioned made my jaw drop. They needed help with their mortgage, property taxes, and various other expenses they could no longer afford. They were essentially asking me to bankroll their lives while they reorganized their finances. We would not ask if it was not important, Mom added. Family helps family. You know that. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. After years of favoritism, and after explicitly telling me to figure out my own life, they were now turning to me for financial rescue. The very same parents who had invested $400,000 in Derek's half-baked scheme without a second thought were now asking me to help bail them out. I took a deep breath. Do you remember when you told me to figure out my own life, that Derek had vision, and I was just good with computers? Silence on the other end of the line. I did figure it out, I continued. I built something sustainable through hard work and careful planning, not flashy offices and Instagram posts. And now you are asking me to give you money because you gambled your retirement on Derek's business instead of making responsible choices. That is not fair, Mom protested weakly. We believed in him. No, I corrected her. You favored him. There is a difference. You have always favored him, and now you are facing the consequences of that choice. Dad got on the phone, then his voice gruff with barely contained emotion. So, you are just going to let your mother and I struggle after everything we have done for you? I laughed. I could not help it. What exactly have you done for me? Dad, Derek got a fully funded college education. I worked 30 hours a week to cover what my scholarship did not. Derek got a basement apartment rent-free whenever he was between jobs. I never moved back home after college. Derek got $400,000 for his business idea. I got told to figure it out myself. That is not how it was, he insisted. That is exactly how it was, I replied firmly. And I did figure it out. I built a successful business with a fraction of the investment you gave Derek. The difference is, I did not expect anything to be handed to me. The conversation devolved from there. There were accusations of bitterness and lack of family loyalty from their side, and painful reminders of years of favoritism from mine. In the end, I offered only to help them find a reputable financial advisor who could help them navigate their new reality. I would not be their financial safety net. My parents were shocked by my refusal. In their world, family obligation was supposed to trump all else, even when that obligation only seemed to flow in one direction. They truly could not understand why I would not simply write them a check and solve their problems. The concept that their decades of favoritism had consequences beyond Derek's failure was something they were not prepared to face. After that phone call, communication became sparse and strained. Through mutual relatives, I heard that my parents were being forced to make difficult decisions. Their comfortable lifestyle built on Dad's banking career, and the assumption of a well-funded retirement was no longer sustainable. Something would have to give, and soon. The financial reality hit my parents hard and fast. Within 3 months of Derek's business collapse, they were forced to sell the family home where we had grown up. The spacious colonial in Brookline had appreciated significantly over the years and should have been their nest egg. Instead, they had to liquidate it to stay afloat. They downsized dramatically to a 2-bedroom apartment in a much less prestigious neighborhood. The furniture that had filled our childhood home barely fit in the new space, and they had to sell or give away items that had been in our family for generations. Each piece that disappeared represented another small consequence of their choice, to bet everything on Derek. Dad, who had been planning to retire instead, took a position at a much smaller investment firm. The prestigious bank where he had built his career for over 30 years was not an option after he had withdrawn so much from his retirement accounts against their financial advisor's recommendations. His new role came with less pay, less prestige, and none of the perks he had become accustomed to. At 63, when he should have been enjoying the fruits of his career, he was starting over. Mom, who had not worked outside the home since before we were born, took a job at a department store in the mall. The woman who had once hosted elegant dinner parties and served on charity boards was now folding sweaters and working the register during the holiday rush. Her hands, once manicured weekly, became rough from handling inventory and operating the cash register. Derek predictably moved back in with them, claiming he needed time to regroup and plan his next venture. Their small apartment became even more cramped with 3 adults, living in a space designed for 2. He slept on a pull-out sofa in the living room, his designer clothes stuffed into plastic storage bins tucked against the walls. The narrative they presented to family, friends, and relatives was that they were simplifying their lives and embracing a more minimalist lifestyle. But the truth spread quickly through their social circle. The neighbors they had impressed for years with stories of Derek's business genius now knew the full story of his spectacular failure and its consequences for the family. Derek struggled to find employment. His resume showed a series of short-lived sales positions, followed by his stint as CEO of a failed startup. Potential employers were not impressed, especially when basic background checks revealed the financial mismanagement of Pa Perfect. He eventually took a job at a cell phone store in the same mall where Mom worked, though he quit after 2 weeks, claiming the manager did not respect his experience as a former CEO. Meanwhile, my software business continued to flourish. We expanded to 70 clients across the East Coast and hired 3 more developers to keep up with demand. I purchased my first home, a modest but nice townhouse, closer to our office. I furnished it carefully, buying quality pieces that would last rather than showy items to impress visitors, a lesson I had learned from watching Derek's approach to business. My success created a complex emotional landscape. There was satisfaction certainly in having proven myself, despite my parents' lack of faith in me. But there was also a surprising sadness in watching my family struggle. Despite everything, they were still my family, and seeing them humbled brought me less pleasure than I might have expected. I maintained my distance, but kept tabs on them through my aunt, who had always been kind to me. She reported that my parents were adjusting to their new circumstances with difficulty. Mom frequently broke down in tears when confronted with their reduced circumstances. Dad had aged visibly, the stress of starting over professionally taking a physical toll. Derek, she told me, was showing signs of both depression and entitlement simultaneously, an odd combination that manifested as angry outbursts, followed by periods of listless inactivity. He blamed everyone but himself for his situation. Our parents for not investing more. The market for not recognizing his genius. Even me for not helping when his business began to struggle. About a year after their financial collapse, I ran into Mom at a grocery store. It was an awkward encounter, filled with stilted small talk. As we were about to part ways, she hesitated, then said, "Your father and I have been talking. We may have made some mistakes in how we handled things with you and Derek." It was not exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I had ever received from either of them. I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Derek is struggling," she continued. "He does not understand why everything went wrong. He did his best. His best involved taking expensive vacations with investor money and hiring his unqualified friends at inflated salaries," I pointed out. Mom flinched but did not argue the point. Progress of a sort. "We did not prepare him properly," she admitted quietly. "We always told him he was special, that success would come easily to him because of his charm and confidence. We never taught him about hard work or careful planning." "No," I agreed. "You did not. But we did not prepare you either," she added unexpectedly. "We told you to figure things out yourself without any support. That was not fair." I was stunned by this admission. "No, it was not," I managed to say. "And yet you did figure it out," she said, with something that sounded almost like pride in her voice. "You built something real, while we were all distracted by Derek's big promises." We parted ways soon after, but that brief conversation marked a shift. It was the first time either of my parents had acknowledged, even indirectly, that their approach to parenting had been fundamentally unbalanced. It was a small crack in the facade of denial they had maintained for decades. Over the following months, similar cracks began to appear. Dad called to ask about investment strategies for his much-reduced portfolio, actually listening to my advice instead of dismissing it. Mom sent a text when my company was featured in a regional business journal, saying simply, "Saw the article. Very impressive." They were small gestures, but they represented a seismic shift in our family dynamic. The collapse of Derek's business and their financial security had forced my parents to confront the reality that their favoritism had not only hurt me, but had ultimately damaged Derek as well. By never holding him accountable, never requiring him to earn his advantages, they had set him up for failure in the real world, where charm alone was not enough. As I watched this painful awakening from a distance, I realized that the satisfaction I had expected to feel at their comeuppance was largely absent. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sadness, tinged with the faintest hope that perhaps after all these years, my family might finally be ready to build relationships based on reality rather than favoritism and fantasy. 2 years after the collapse of Paw Perfect and my parents' financial downfall, I received an unexpected call from my father on a Tuesday afternoon. "Dustin," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone, "I was wondering if you might be willing to meet me for coffee this weekend. Just the two of us." The request took me by surprise. In the past 2 years, our interactions had been limited to brief conversations at holidays and the occasional text message. Sure, I agreed, curiosity overcoming my hesitation. Saturday morning, At that place near your apartment. We met at a small cafe, a few blocks from my parents' modest apartment. Dad arrived before me, already seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He had aged considerably in the past couple of years, his hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He stood awkwardly when he saw me extending his hand for a formal handshake before thinking better of it and attempting an equally awkward half-hug. After a few minutes of small talk about the weather and local sports teams, Dad took a deep breath and got to the point. "I owe you an apology," he said, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. "A long overdue one." I remained silent, giving him space to continue. "Your mother and I, we got it wrong. Very wrong. For years we favored Derek over you. We gave him advantages and support we denied you. We invested in his potential while dismissing yours." He looked up at me, his eyes watery. "And we were completely wrong in our assessment of both of you." I had imagined this moment many times over the years, but now that it was happening, I found myself speechless. "We thought Derek's charisma and social skills were indicators of future success," Dad continued. "We thought your quiet, analytical nature meant you would always be in his shadow. We could not have been more wrong." It hurt. I admitted, my voice steadier than I expected. "Every time you dismissed my achievements or gave Derek opportunities you denied me, it hurt." Dad nodded, accepting this truth without defense. "I know, and I cannot undo that hurt. All I can do is tell you that I see it now, and I am deeply sorry." He told me that the past 2 years had been a painful but necessary education. Losing their retirement savings, their home, their social standing, had stripped away the illusions they had maintained for decades. They had been forced to examine the choices that led to their current situation, including how they had parented both of their sons. "Derek is struggling," Dad said. "He never developed the resilience or work ethic that you did. He expected things to come easily because they always had. Now he cannot cope with the reality that success requires hard work and perseverance." I knew this already from family updates. Derek had cycled through several more jobs, never lasting more than a few months at any of them. He still lived with our parents, still blamed external factors for his failures, still talked about the next big idea that would redeem him. "And how are you and Mom doing?" I asked. Dad sighed. "We are managing. Your mother actually enjoys her job now, though she would never admit it. She has made friends with her coworkers, people she would never have socialized with in our old life. I think it has been good for her to see how the rest of the world lives." He paused, then added, "I will be working, until I am 70 at least. The new firm is okay, though, nothing like my old position. But we are adjusting. We have learned to live with less." There was a dignity in his acceptance that I had never seen in him before. The arrogant investment banker, who had dismissed my career and thrown money at Derek's half-baked schemes, was gone, replaced by a humbler man who understood the value of steady work and living within one's means. "Your company is doing well," he said, and it was not a question. "I follow your progress online. The expansion to the West Coast, the new features for wineries. Very impressive." The validation I had craved for so long was finally being offered, but I found I no longer needed it as desperately as I once had. My own success, built through hard work and smart decisions, had become its own reward. "We are doing well," I acknowledged. "We just hit 120 clients, and we are profitable enough that I am considering an acquisition offer from a larger software company." Dad's eyebrows rose. "An acquisition? That would be substantial, I imagine." I nodded. "Very substantial. Enough that I would never need to work again, though I probably will in some capacity." The irony hung between us, unspoken but acknowledged. My business, built with a fraction of the investment they had given Derek, was now worth millions. The son they had dismissed had achieved the financial security they had lost. After a moment of silence, Dad spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "I know we have no right to ask anything of you, but your mother and I, we miss you. We would like to be part of your life again if you would consider it." I had thought about this possibility over the past 2 years, considering what I would say if they ever reached out in earnest. The anger that had once burned hot had cooled over time, leaving behind a more complex set of emotions. "I am willing to try," I said carefully, "but there would need to be conditions." Dad nodded. accepting this without hesitation. "First, I will help you and Mom with a monthly stipend," I said. "Not enough to return to your old lifestyle, but enough to ease the financial pressure and allow you to eventually retire." Dad started to protest, but I held up my hand. "This is not charity. It is what family does for family when the relationship is healthy. But there are conditions." The first condition was that they would need to attend family therapy both with me and as a couple. The patterns of favoritism and denial needed to be addressed openly if we were to build a healthier relationship. The second condition was that Derek would need to get and keep a job, any job, for at least 6 months before I would include him in the reconciliation process. He needed to demonstrate some level of responsibility and self-sufficiency. The third condition was that they would never again compare me to Derek or dismiss my achievements or choices. Dad agreed to all 3 conditions, without hesitation, an acceptance that would have been unimaginable in our old family dynamic. As we parted ways, he hugged me properly this time, holding on perhaps a second longer than necessary. The following months brought gradual, cautious rebuilding. My parents attended therapy sessions, initially reluctant, but eventually engaging with the process. Mom found it harder than Dad to acknowledge the favoritism and its damage, but she too began to recognize the patterns that had shaped our family. The monthly stipend I provided eased their financial stress without enabling a return to their former extravagance. They remained in their apartment but no longer had to worry about making rent or unexpected expenses. Dad could now plan to retire at 67, still later than he had originally intended, but better than working into his 70s. Derek struggled with my conditions at first, quitting 2 more jobs in rapid succession. But eventually the reality of his situation sank in. He found work as a sales associate at a men's clothing store, a position that utilized his natural charm without requiring the business acumen he lacked. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he excelled in this more structured environment and was promoted to assistant manager after 5 months. Our first family dinner with all 4 of us present was awkward but civil. Derek was subdued, his former bravado diminished by his experiences. He avoided eye contact with me initially, perhaps embarrassed by the reversal of our fortunes. But by the end of the evening, he had relaxed enough to ask genuine questions about my business and listen to the answers without interrupting. Over time, our family dynamic shifted into something healthier. My parents learned to appreciate my analytical nature and business acumen traits they had once dismissed. They celebrated my successes without comparing them to Derek's situation. And most surprisingly, they began to set appropriate boundaries with Derek, no longer rushing to solve his problems or finance his whims. Derek and I would never be best friends. Too much history stood between us. But we developed a cordial relationship based on our shared experience of growing up in a dysfunctional family system. He occasionally asked for business advice, which I provided with the caveat that he needed to do the actual work himself. As for me, the experience transformed how I viewed success and validation. I had spent so many years craving my parents' approval, only to discover that external validation was ultimately hollow. True satisfaction came from building something of value from knowing my own worth, regardless of others' recognition. This realization led me to start mentoring young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering them the guidance and support I had lacked. I found deep fulfillment in helping talented young people navigate the tech industry, especially those who, like me, had been told to figure it out without adequate resources. When the acquisition of my company finally went through, I purchased a modest but comfortable house for my parents as a retirement home. It was nothing like their former Brookline colonial, but it was mortgage-free and had a small garden where Mom could pursue her new interest in growing vegetables. The look on their faces when I handed them the keys told me that they understood the gesture for what it was. Not a restoration of their former status, but a new beginning based on mutual respect rather than obligation or favoritism. Last month I visited them for dinner at their new home. As we sat in their small but pleasant dining room, I noticed how different we all were from the family of 4 years ago. Mom more relaxed without the pressure of maintaining appearances. Dad humbler and more thoughtful in his observations. Derek still struggling to find his path, but finally taking responsibility for his choices. And me no longer the overlooked twin desperate for recognition, but a successful adult secure in my own accomplishments. The journey had been painful for all of us but necessary. Being forced to figure it out on my own had ultimately been the greatest gift my parents unintentionally gave me, teaching me self-reliance, determination, and the value of building something solid rather than flashy. The sweetness of the outcome was not in seeing my family struggle as I had once imagined it would be, but in watching all of us grow into better versions of ourselves through that struggle. Have you ever had to figure something out on your own that ended up being a blessing in disguise? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of family favoritism and its consequences resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most painful experiences.